Picture this. You're a world-class footballer, walking into the heart of American power, expecting a ceremonial handshake and a few proud photos. That's the dream. But for Juventus players in early June, the White House doors opened onto something else entirely. A whirlwind of controversy, unexpected political debate, and a moment that would echo around the globe. What was meant to be a celebration of sports quickly became a front-row seat to the collision of politics, sports, and identity. Let's unravel how that day unfolded, why it matters for the future of global sports, and how the ripple effects might reach much further than anyone imagined. For generations, White House visits by champion teams have been a staple of American tradition. These events, dating back to the 19th century, were intended as celebrations of unity, achievement, and the spirit of competition. Take, for example, President Calvin Coolidge's meeting with the Washington Senators in 1924, or President John F. Kennedy's iconic gatherings of athletes during the 1960s. These ceremonies were designed to transcend politics, offering a rare moment when national pride could shine through regardless of party or ideology. But in recent decades, the line between sports and politics has grown ever thinner. From the Obama era to the Trump years, teams have increasingly used their platforms to take stands, or to opt out entirely. The Golden State Warriors famously declined an invitation in 2017, citing disagreements with the administration's policies. The Philadelphia Eagles' planned visit the following year was called off amidst disputes over player protests, turning what should have been simple celebrations into sources of national debate. So, when Juventus, a club with over a century of European football history, arrived in Washington, D.C., expectations were high, but the mood was already cautious. The team was in the United States to prepare for the FIFA Club World Cup, an international tournament that brings together the best from every continent. Their fans, both in Italy and around the world, anticipated headlines focused on thrilling matches and the promise of international camaraderie. No one expected the political storm that was about to unfold. Inside the Oval Office, the cameras flashed as Juventus players lined up behind President Donald Trump and FIFA President Gianni Infantino. The moment should have been simple: a gifted jersey, a few words about the beautiful game, and a shared hope for sporting excellence. But almost immediately, the agenda shifted. President Trump, never one to avoid controversy, seized the moment to address two of America's most divisive issues: transgender athlete participation in sports and the escalating conflict with Iran. Juventus winger Timothy Weah, whose father George Weah is both a football legend and the former president of Liberia, later described the moment as surreal. "It was all a surprise to me, honestly. I had no idea that was how the afternoon was going to play out," Weah confessed. "I just want to play football, man." The tension in the room became palpable as President Trump posed pointed questions to the players. "Could a woman make your team, fellas?" he asked, raising eyebrows and forcing Juventus general manager Damian Comoli to redirect the conversation toward the club's highly successful women's team, which had recently captured the Italian championship. But the president was not to be deterred. He quickly pivoted to the politics of gender identity, making remarks about transgender participation that deepened the awkwardness and underscored the growing cultural divide. Meanwhile, outside the White House, these very debates were playing out across courtrooms and boardrooms. In the United States, legal battles over the inclusion of transgender athletes have reached fever pitch. In May of this year, the California Interscholastic Federation expanded qualifying spots in track events, a move intended to accommodate athletes who felt displaced by the new wave of transgender participation. LGBTQ advocacy groups have launched lawsuits against executive orders restricting transgender athletes, arguing that such policies violate the principles enshrined in Title IX, the landmark law prohibiting gender-based discrimination in education. Excluding transgender athletes sends a harmful message that they don't belong, undermining the principles of inclusion and fairness, says Dr. Veronica Ivy, a renowned sports ethicist and former competitive cyclist. The Supreme Court of the United States is now set to hear arguments this coming October on a Mississippi law banning gender-affirming care for minors. This pivotal case could set a nationwide precedent, affecting not only health care, but also the policies that govern who can play in school and college sports. If the court upholds the Mississippi law, it could embolden other states to pass similar restrictions, potentially shutting the door for a generation of transgender athletes. Conversely, if the law is struck down, it might establish broader protections, compelling organizations like FIFA and the NCAA to revisit their own participation rules and possibly pave the way for more nuanced, evidence-based approaches. Joanna Harper, a consultant on transgender athlete inclusion, emphasizes, blanket bans are not supported by scientific evidence. Individualized assessments are crucial for fair competition. Back in the Oval Office, President Trump's focus shifted from domestic debates to international tensions. The topic: Iran. With FIFA President Gianni Infantino looking on, himself now under investigation by the organization's ethics committee for potentially breaching neutrality rules by attending the political gathering, the discussion turned to the future of the Middle East. President Trump speculated openly about the possibility of the Iranian regime collapsing, hinting at the United States' willingness to respond aggressively to further escalation. U.S.-Iran relations are at a precarious juncture, with little room for diplomacy amid escalating regional tensions, warns Carnegie Endowment expert Kareem Sajjadpour. This was not just political theater. In the past 12 months, the United States has allocated more than $700 million in new security assistance to Israel, responding to Iran's increased uranium enrichment at the Fordow facility, a move that has alarmed both European and Middle Eastern governments. The International Atomic Energy Agency recently confirmed that Iran's enrichment levels have reached 60% purity, a figure far above the agreed limit under the now-defunct nuclear deal. Dr. Sanam Vakil of Chatham House notes, the increase in uranium enrichment by Iran is a calculated move to increase leverage in any potential negotiations, but it also raises the risk of miscalculation. These developments threaten not just regional stability, but also the international sporting events meant to foster cooperation, such as the very Club World Cup Juventus had traveled so far to compete in. Yet the era when athletes could simply focus on the game is gone. The 21st century has seen athletes increasingly thrust into the spotlight as symbols and spokespeople for larger social issues. Social media, in particular, has amplified their voices and magnified their every gesture. When Megan Rapinoe kneeled during the national anthem, when Colin Kaepernick protested police brutality, or when Marcus Rashford fought child hunger in the United Kingdom, the sports world bore witness to the growing expectation that athletes must take sides, not just in games, but in culture wars. And it's not only the athletes who feel the pressure. The organizations that govern sports are now under unprecedented scrutiny. FIFA's Ethics Committee has quietly opened an inquiry into Gianni Infantino's presence at the Trump meeting, citing possible violations of neutrality rules. The International Olympic Committee, meanwhile, is preparing a revised framework for transgender athlete inclusion, set to be released before the Winter Olympics in 2026. In the United States, the NCAA is being pressed by both advocacy groups and state governments to clarify its policies, balancing inclusiveness with concerns about fair competition. David Witter, a former White House advisor, warns, mixing sports team visits with political messaging risks alienating athletes and politicizing events meant to celebrate achievements. Yet the implications go even further. Consider the logistical challenges already facing this year's Club World Cup. High travel costs and visa issues have complicated team participation, with some squads struggling to secure entry into the United States amid tightening travel restrictions. According to a recent Congressional Research Service report, the Trump administration is considering expanding travel bans to as many as 36 additional countries, including Liberia, home to Timothy Weah's father and a nation with deep footballing ties. If implemented, such measures could make it harder for players, staff, and even fans from certain countries to attend international tournaments. The risk of global events becoming bargaining chips in political disputes is more real than ever. And here's something most fans never see. Stadium attendance at this year's Club World Cup has been erratic. President Trump claimed that Juventus's match was totally sold out, but official attendance figures showed only about 18,000 spectators in a stadium that can hold 20,000. Earlier in the week, fewer than 4,000 people showed up to watch another match in a venue built for over 25,000. Some blame the high cost of travel, others cite the political climate, but the underlying truth is that the intersection of sports, politics, and global events is reshaping even the fan experience. So, what does all of this mean for the future of international sports, politics, and global cooperation? The ripple effects from that stormy White House gathering could be much larger than anyone on Juventus, or even the president himself, anticipated. First, the legal battles over transgender athletes are likely to escalate, not just in the United States but around the world. The Supreme Court's upcoming decision could set a precedent that reshapes how educational institutions, sports leagues, and even Olympic committees define both inclusion and fair play. If the executive order restricting transgender athletes stands, it could inspire similar measures in other countries and lead to a patchwork of conflicting policies. If the order is struck down, it may accelerate the adoption of more inclusive, science-based guidelines. Suzanne Goldberg, a law professor at Columbia, points out, executive orders targeting transgender individuals face significant legal hurdles, particularly if they infringe on established civil rights protections. The stakes are high, not just for athletes, but for how society as a whole understands fairness, equality, and belonging. For a young transgender soccer player in Texas or a swimmer in California, the outcome could determine whether they have the chance to compete at all. Second, the international dimension cannot be ignored. U.S.-Iran tensions are not just abstract diplomatic squabbles. They have real-world consequences for travel, security, and the staging of international events. Dr. Sanam Vakil's warning about miscalculation is echoed by many analysts who worry that a single incident, whether a missile launch or a diplomatic spat, could derail tournaments, disrupt travel, and even lead to boycotts. In 2018, Iranian athletes faced visa delays ahead of the World Wrestling Championships in the United States, a situation that could easily repeat or worsen if relations continue to deteriorate. Third, the role of athletes as agents of social change is only going to grow. The days when sports were considered an escape from politics are over. Today's athletes are expected to know the issues, take positions, and use their platforms for more than just endorsements. As Timothy Weah's experience demonstrates, even those who would prefer to focus on the game are drawn into broader debates. Weston McKennie, another Juventus and U.S. midfielder, has publicly criticized President Trump in the past, calling him not the right man for the job and accusing him of racism. These statements reverberate far beyond the locker room, influencing public discourse and shaping perceptions of both sports and politics. What practical lessons can viewers take away from all this? First, recognize that sports are no longer isolated from the world's biggest controversies. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, a parent, or simply a fan, understanding these issues is essential to being an informed global citizen. When you support your team or cheer on your favorite player, you're also participating in debates about fairness, justice, and the kind of world we want to build. Second, demand accountability and transparency. The ongoing investigation into FIFA President Gianni Infantino's White House meeting is a reminder that even the most powerful figures are not above scrutiny. The results of that inquiry could influence future relationships between sports officials and political leaders, potentially setting new standards for neutrality and ethical conduct. As David Witter put it, when sports and politics mix, the risk is not just alienation, it's the erosion of trust in the institutions that are supposed to bring us together. Third, embrace the complexity. The intersection of sports, politics, and technology brings both risks and opportunities. Advances in science and data analytics are helping sports organizations craft better policies on inclusion, safety, and performance. For example, the International Olympic Committee is working with medical experts, sociologists, and athletes themselves to develop guidelines that balance competitive fairness with respect for gender diversity. These efforts are far from perfect, but they represent the kind of open, evidence-based dialogue that is needed in every area of society. Looking ahead, the future remains uncertain. The next Supreme Court ruling could fundamentally alter who gets to compete in American sports. The outcome of U.S.-Iran tensions could determine where international tournaments are held, or whether some nations even participate. Every time a team sets foot in a presidential palace, the boundary between celebration and confrontation will be tested anew. FIFA, the NCAA, and other governing bodies will need to remain agile, responsive, and deeply committed to principles of fairness and inclusion if they hope to weather these storms. There is also a cultural reckoning underway. As public attitudes shift, especially among younger generations, the push for greater inclusivity and equity in sports is likely to intensify. Surveys show that adults under 30 are twice as likely as those over 60 to support transgender inclusion in competitive sports. This generational divide suggests that the future of sports will look very different from its past, with new norms, new heroes, and new expectations for how athletes engage with society. For now, the Juventus players have returned to the pitch, but the memory of that day in the Oval Office lingers. Their experience is a microcosm of a much larger story, the ongoing struggle to define the role of sports in a world that is increasingly divided yet deeply interconnected. the questions raised about gender, power, diplomacy, and leadership are not going away. In fact, they are likely to become even more urgent as technology, politics, and culture continue to converge. So as you watch the next big match, remember, you're witnessing more than a game. You're seeing history in the making, with every pass, every goal, every handshake, and every controversy. The world of sports is no longer a calm oasis away from the world's troubles. It is, instead, the very epicenter of our most pressing debates. If you found this story as surprising and thought-provoking as we did, hit that subscribe button, share your thoughts in the comments, and join the conversation. What role should sports play in shaping our societies? Should athletes speak out or focus on the game? How can institutions craft policies that are both fair and inclusive? Your voice matters.